My name is René. I'm an ambassador for the German Foundation for the Rights of Future Generations, and Mick asked me to prepare a bit about the intergenerational justice impacting megatrends that we as young people and that future generations should be aware of. As you can imagine, this is quite a broad topic, and if I would talk in detail about it, we would probably not only be here today, but for the next couple of days. So I picked out a couple of those multiple and broad challenges we're facing, and we'll shortly talk about it, but we'll more than focus on the underlying issue that's the problem with it and how we can maybe solve that by lowering the voting age in several countries and how to engage young people to be aware of those challenges. So if we look at those problems, for example, or at those challenges, for example, digitalization, as Kirsi just mentioned, if we look at elections, we have a rise of fake news or alternative facts that is influencing how we make decisions, how those elections, I mean, for example, in the US or in the UK, turned out. And this is not only a problem that young people face, but that we face as a whole of society. And there are other trends emerging, for example, artificial intelligence or automatization, where we cannot even fathom yet how this will change our society in the future. And if we look at environmental problems such as climate change, the loss of biodiversity or land degradation, and how to feed a population that will grow until 2050 and even further, we have so many decisions to make now that have such a long-lasting impact that we're not able to just think in 4 or 5 year election cycles. So basically most of these other challenges, also access to education, rising nationalism in countries, financing pensions, access to health, gender equality, those are becoming more and more broad, and they require long-term thinking, analytical skills, and unprecedented collaboration, not only between countries, but also between generations. This becomes a problem if we're looking at how the society, at least in Europe, will be changing over the next couple of decades. Europe as a whole will be aging quite substantially. I was looking at the numbers for Estonia, and at the moment, the population in Estonia, there are about 15% of the population who are 15 or younger, so they are not able to vote at the moment, and there are about 20% of the whole population who are 65 or older. If we look at the European Commission's projections until 2070, the share of society which is 15 or younger will stay more or less the same, while the share of society which is 65 or older will rise to about 1/3 of the whole population. So if we don't do anything about it, then the electoral base will shift quite substantially towards the older age, which is not necessarily a problem, but if we look at the tendency that older voters have more short-term objectives than younger voters, we tend to end up with short-term decision-making and not the decisions we need to tackle those problems I just mentioned. I mean, obviously not every old person is not in favor of tackling those problems, and not every young person is deeply in favor of doing those, but as a general issue, younger people are more prone to think about those topics and are more interested in them because they will live with the effect, whereas you, I mean, ask yourself, how old will you be in 2050, how old will you be in 2070? And if you then have to decide about issues that will only take effect 10, 15, 20 years later, then you might know why you might prefer short-term solutions over long-term solutions. In general, young people are not as disenchanted with politics as the media, or not as we sometimes think. Even if we look at the surveys that are done within around general elections, even if they're asked if they're interested in politics, they might say no, but if you then ask how they think about housing, how they think about access to healthcare, about job opportunities, about the environment, this might be different, because then people say this topic is important to them, so they might think politically, but they might just be disillusioned by the current political system and how politicians represent them. So what young people are more interested in generally is those long-term topics. And to also further talk about to mention what I think Patrick mentioned before, is that young people are not necessarily biased towards certain political parties. If we look at the outcome of, at least in Germany, of the votes from young people of about 16, 17 who now voted, that doesn't change much over the age cohort of 18 to 30. Young people in general are a bit more biased towards liberal left-leaning parties, but in general it's not like they will just vote for more radical or fun parties or just throw their vote away. There's not that much change. So on the one hand, there's not really an incentive for any political party to push a lower voting age forward, but there's also not really, there should not really be an objection from any political party if they look at this fact. Even though, on a personal note, I think a lower voting age should not be linked to either incentive or blocking from any of these parties, because, as we heard also before, this is part of the democratic state. So we as Foundation for the Rights of Future Generations came up with some of those solutions to both help young people to become more engaged in this discourse, and also to tackle those long-term political problems that we cannot really solve in 1 or 2 election cycles. So one of the possible solutions we already heard quite often today is setting up new ways to engage and interact with younger people, to show them that their interests are valuable, so to make them feel that their ideas are worth something, and that they actually can influence something, and that they are not disregarded. We also advocate for rights to vote from birth on, so we would still like to have a default right to vote from, for example, 16-year-olds or maybe 14, 12-year-olds. But for every person that is younger, they should be able to just go to the city council or municipality and register in their voters registry, so that they can from then on take part in the general elections. And also we just released a new paper on future-proof institutions, where we developed a couple of ways to future-proof German institutions, but some of them are transferable also to other countries. And I picked 2 of them to show them here. In Germany, we're thinking about implementing or strengthen a sustainability impact assessment for draft regulations, so that every ministry should be required, if they propose a new law, to give an assessment how this law could impact the both environment as well as the political environment for the next decades, and what outcomes would be done with it. And also we propose that each newly elected federal government should present its long-term political plans over the next 30 years when they are elected. So this long-term perspective, which takes place about 1 generation or 30 years, could influence how they implement laws, and how this will be put in context with the general idea on how to proceed as society. And as a last point, I want to say that even though younger people tend to think more in the long term and older people tend to think more in a short term in these political spaces, we should avoid an intergenerational conflict. We are facing so many broad and complex issues as society that it needs both young and old generations, and basically everybody we have to be there, and that we need to find a way how to make the laws and the policy decisions we have as society future-proof. Thank you.